You know what today's session is. I'm going to take the opportunity to briefly introduce our speaker today. Professor Feinberg is the Handleman Professor of Marketing. He's also a professor in the Statistics Department. His research examines how people make choices in uncertain environments. On a more personal level, Fred is one of my favorite collaborators. He's really one of the best modelers I've ever met in my entire life. And I have seen him over the past 6 months do really amazing things with Gen AI. So I'm so happy he can come here and share what he's been working on and teach it all to us today. One quick thing, there's a QR code here. You're welcome to scan it now. We would love to have feedback on these sessions. We're interested in what's working, what's not working, if we're teaching at the right level. And we'll put this up at the end again so you can see it. All right, thanks so much, Fred.
This is on. Am I hearable? Super. So thank you all for coming. Just a bit of the genesis of this. I did a 7-minute version of this at one of these earlier faculty get-togethers, and it was surprising how many people, even professional statisticians or people who analyze data as part of their day-to-day research lives, had not really explored how much easier Gen AI could make the type of work that they do. And I'd like to do a little of that today, but the main thing that I'd like to get across is you can be much more exploratory and try out ways of looking at your data, things you might not have explored otherwise because there's such a high bar, like a steep wall, in learning new packages. Nobody wants to spend their time doing that, or worse, downloading code and trying to change it. So everything I've done today is structured so we can do it interactively. I don't know if there's an hour of material or 6 hours of material. I'm starting to think more like 6 than 1. So I might make it a little bit more like a lecture as we get more deeply into it. So I'll show you how I want to set it up in just a while, but I'm hoping that everybody has access to RStudio or their favorite analytical engine to try some of these things out. I set it up as little structured exercises based on a particular data set. So with no further ado, I call this LLMs as a front end for interactive computational statistics, and it's really some proofs of concept, and I'd like to emphasize I did not write one line of the code that you're about to see. It was all generated. That was my goal for myself, using ChatGPT and Poe, and I'm sure you can accomplish the same thing, and I'll show you where you can get the code base if you just get tired of trying in just a moment. So a bit of background, 3 reasons why I think I may be an appropriate person to do this is all I do literally is build statistical models, and you might wonder what that means. So a quick segue, what is building models? It's not this, where we take data and we throw it into some black box, and it says, you should be spending 11.4% more on education. I'm very skeptical of this, and I'll say why in a moment as an approach, but something like this. We have a diagram. It could be a directed cyclic graph. It could be a bunch of boxes and arrows. And we understand how everything is supposed to react with everything else. It could be a simple model. It could be extremely sophisticated. But the point is we understand all the relationships. It might be a bad model, but at least we know what we're working with. And once we have a model like this, we could sometimes come up with some type of crazy sampling procedure, which, because of something I'll show you at the end called STAN, has made all of that crazy stuff unnecessary. Our ability to build really complicated models and estimate them, writing all the code with LLMs, has really gone through the roof just in the last year or 2. And again, I didn't write a single line of the code that I'm going to show you. So we'll get to that in just a bit. You might ask, why not just use AI for everything? It's astonishing. It's awesome at some things, but it's usually not interpretable. What do I mean by that? There's a lot of evidence of baked-in biases like racism. Timnit Gebru wrote her doctoral dissertation at Stanford on this and published some famous research. She started working at Google, and somewhat ironically, she was let go from Google. You can Google it to find out more about that. But there's a lot of evidence that some things are just part of LLMs that are very hard to train out. And again, if you don't know what the relationships are between variables, you don't know what you're getting back. I will take my cue from a paper that I would recommend that everybody have a look at, so much so that I actually uploaded it to our archive. I'll get there in a moment. It's called, it has a great name, Stop Explaining Black Box Machine Learning Models for High-Stakes Decisions and Use Interpretable Models Instead. We'll take the advice of Professor Rudin and focus on models built to help clarify and visualize relationships amongst variables. With that said, just a moment here, what does Professor Rudin's paper actually say? It makes several important points. Oh, Beth, is this the right version of the? Oh, this is a stunt. I knew this would happen. But what I'd like to show you is if you do make a mistake during a talk, you can always go to an LLM and say, oh, that's me, or at least a heavily photoshopped version of me. Where is Poe? Here's our friend Poe. I would like to understand better what this paper actually says. So I'm going to go into, this is the code. Here is the file by Cynthia Rudin. It, by the way, is not the published version of the paper because you're actually not allowed to do that. Everything has to be open access. This is the open access version that's hosted on the archive. And I might say something like, I need 6 bullet points from this article. You could also speak to it. That's pretty good, I would say. And Poe, to me, is the champ at summarizing research articles. There are even specialized tools for this. I'm going to try to stay away from those. So moving away from my little stunt here, because I actually pulled these points out myself. But it's pretty easy. You have to, of course, verify that what you're doing is not ridiculous. But it's become much easier to understand what what is being said. So this is the procedure that I went with. I just said, can you summarize the attached paper, 4 to 6 bullet points? And it gave me really long ones. So I said, can you make them more succinct? They don't have to be full sentences. And it gave me these. I, of course, have read the paper, and they're really spot on. And then I edited them. And the important things that she finds here are interpretable models can achieve high accuracy without sacrificing interpretability. And interpretability, I'd like to emphasize this one, is crucial in decision making. If you are trying to say that this affects this, you're making a causal statement, and you really are not wanting to trust AI to figure out causal relationships amongst variables. We have a lot of experience in building models that are plausibly causal using modern techniques, but using AI for those decisions is not a great idea. So this is the vantage point that I'm trying to take. So moving back, there's 2 other reasons why I think I'm good to do this. I'm really bad at R, and I'm horrible at Python, and I think that's an advantage. I used MATLAB for 30 years because my advisor's son ran the company, and he handed it to me and said, version 0.8. And he said, you should use this for your dissertation. And once I find something that works, I stick with it. So I have 30 years of MATLAB programs. And then this R thing came along, and I have all these undergraduate RAs, and some of them are like 19. And after a month or 2, they look at me going, are you a professor and you don't know how to do that in R? And the answer is no. And I don't want to become an R expert, and I don't want to download a million things to figure out how to do it. I've become extremely adept at producing code that is bulletproof and annotated while using R by using LLMs as a front end. And that's the second point. I'm a believer in steepest descent, also called being super lazy. I want to explore my data, create compelling illustrations, and not spend a life on Stack Exchange. And I mention this because just last week, I went to a text mining class aimed at behavioral researchers. And the person who is very adept and well-meaning said, oh, you can go to Stack Exchange and download the code, and then you can change the code. This is behavioral people who are not usually coders. And I was thinking, nobody's going to do this. Nobody has time for this. So the question is, how can you get exactly what you want and create really compelling illustrations of what your data tell you without spending a life on Stack Exchange or becoming a programmer? So with that said, where does the AI ML come in? There's several concrete things I want to cover today. All the code is already available, and I will distribute the slides, but I'd like to do all of this as interactively as possible. The first thing is manipulate data and ask ChatGPT to suggest appropriate analyses, generate and improve code, maybe suggest better analyses. I think most importantly is visualize. I teach a class on multivariate statistics, primarily for MBA students, and they have to go talk to real people who often haven't even had a statistics class. They need to come up with really compelling visual illustrations that say something like, you said this would happen, but this is what actually happens, without going in, oh, we use the causal forest for this. Nobody cares in that world. We care, but we still have to convey our results to people who may not have that background. So we want the computer to be able to develop visualizations of analyses that no one has ever done before. We also want to document our code and workflow, and if there's time at the end, I'd be happy to take any questions. We can do them in real time. So a bit before starting, I'd just like to give some credit where it's due. Beth Ubersater, who's in the back, she set all of this up, and she answered endless questions without ever losing her cool with me. I tend to be a little on the anal retentive side, and she was good with it. Elizabeth Brooke, she suggested the session, and she's my favorite co-author. It's a mutual admiration society, I think, because she said the same about me. Juan Gutierrez, who gave a seminar yesterday, he spent an hour Zooming with me before the whole thing to go over everything that he would do, so there'd be minimal overlap. Jug runs Midas, and he's an awesome person. He's been helming it with great aplomb. And Jing Liu is somebody that everyone should get to know here. She does data discovery and hooks people up with data providers and companies to do projects along with them. I've had many productive interactions with her. So Midas, thank you for setting all of this up throughout the year for all of us. So this was a real dramatized conversation I had with Elizabeth and Beth. I said, hey, Beth and Elizabeth, thanks for setting all this up. You rock, but I wanted to run something by you. And they're like, yeah, sure. Why don't you tell us what it is? It would be so fun for the session to run interactively. I put a query into ChatGPT, and we work with whatever comes out, you know, like improv. And their reaction was, oh, that sounds really interesting, but maybe you should have a safety net. And I'm glad I did that. So the philosophy for today is I'm going to ask you to try to do some things on your own setups. We're going to have a collaborative space. But as the safety net, I've pre-run everything, and I've archived all the code, and I have all the analyses that I could show you. But learning by doing is kind of really important, and you might come up with something better or more interesting than I did on the same data set. So the procedure for today is I'll try to run, that's not grammatical. I will try to run ChatGPT in real time, but who knows? I may need to resort to backups or other large language models. Try to run things on your own machine, or this is, if you haven't done it yet, you can get a free account to run RStudio on Posit Cloud. They host RStudio. I got one. All you need is your Umesh or Gmail ID. It would be nice if you went to Poe or ChatGPT or UMGPT, which is the turbo version and unlimited, but you can't upload documents, so there's a certain trade-off there. Interject and interact. You can say, hey, what's that, Fred? I don't understand what you're talking about. Can you spend a little more time explaining those results? Hopefully we can do that together. There are also fancier things like Copilot that inject themselves right into Python or R. I don't want to do anything fancy today. This will speed up your workflow even more, but I wanted to set the bar low. Just have access to an LLM and RStudio, and we're good to go. Also be careful what you upload. The very first session that they had here at the beginning of last year was talking about ethics. You have to understand that anything you upload into the cloud could be going somewhere else. I have it on good faith that that's not true with the version of ChatGPT, but that's why I did not upload the published version of Cynthia Rudin's paper, just to get those bullet points. And this is being recorded, so let's aim for lively yet decorous. So I'm also a bit nervous, and instead of turning to benzodiazepines, I'd like to appeal to Scarlatti. He published 550 sonatas in his lifetime, and he wrote a famous preface in musical circles, and I'd like to just say what it was. Dear reader, whether you be dilettante or professor, like there's a big difference between those, in these compositions do not expect any profound learning, but rather an ingenious jesting with art to accommodate you to the mastery of the harpsichord. Perhaps it will be agreeable to you. Here's the relevant part. Therefore, show yourself more human than critical, and your pleasure shall increase. So in other words, you'll have a better time if you're not too critical about what happens today. I am a bit nervous. I've never done this before, and I can prove it when we look at the data. These are our materials. Everything, if you want to go there now, if you didn't get the preparatory thing, tiny URL -2024FF. All of the data for us, I'll go there in a minute. There's going to be a communal scratch pad. I'll put that up, and anyone who gets a result they'd like to share, we can all see it in real time. There's some papers. I showed you one of them, supplemental material. I put all the code for today in a subdirectory, but it would really spoil the fun if you looked and just ran my code. But anything that doesn't make sense, or you don't want to grab it from the slides, which I'll eventually post, it's available to you right now. I have slides with no results. So everything that I show is going to be another type of scratch pad where anybody can paste in their results, and we compare them. Slides with results will be put up eventually. And I'd like you to run RStudio locally or on Posit Cloud or on Virtual and pick some LLM. I use ChatGPT for almost everything except Poe to deal with large documents because it seems to do that a bit better. So here's our data set for today. I had a bunch of data that I'd prepared in advance, but then I'd have to explain it all to you. So I had this crazy idea. Let's use data on us. So I took the registration list as of 3 days ago, and I wanted to see how far I could go with it, but I had to anonymize it. So I took the first three letters of everybody's email, and just to explain the data set, I think you'll be surprised how much you can do with a data set like this. The reason I'm using it, by the way, is there's only 114 lines, so all the models will run very quickly. And we could understand all the manipulations just by looking at the data. So the line is the order you signed up. There's a timestamp when you signed up. There's a role, what you said you were. I mildly recoded it because people had very interesting descriptions of their own role. We'll look at that in a moment. It asked you if you're on the mailing list, that you want to be, and then I have the first 3 letters of your email address. So that's the data we're going to analyze, and I think I have like 25 different analyses of these data. You'd be, again, surprised how far you can go with it. So let's get started. How does RStudio know where your files are? So perhaps you can Google that, or you can figure it out, and we can share it. I hope you'll all download the data and access it. So you should put the data, the registration. It's more fun if you start with the Excel file, because it's not in native R format, but I put that in the supplemental files as well. So if everybody can go over to the registration data.xls, because if you don't load the data, you can't do anything. So why doesn't everybody give that a whirl? And if you don't know what to do, you can ask ChatGPT. While that's happening, I will go. I don't know about the mechanics of going back and forth between these two, but I will do it. Where is here's our shared directory. So it's this one that you're looking for, the last one. And our scratch pads are here. This one is blank. In fact, I'll open that so we can see it. Maybe everybody should. So anything you put here will be seen by everyone. And then there's one of the slides themselves where I've expurgated the actual answers. And oh, I don't know if I set this up as everybody can edit it. Oops, I will do that now. Oh, I did not. There we go. So anybody can dump their materials into there. So this is what we're working on. How do I tell RStudio where it can find my files? Does anybody want to tell us? Or copy their results or their ChatGPT query in there? Yeah.
You can set working directory. You can access it directly by providing the file path. But if you save it same to your desktop, it automatically accesses desktop as your working directory.
And how do you load an Excel file? Into R?
So you would use read Excel library or something like that.
Yes, so you're more sophisticated, I think. I like to do things the easiest possible way, but his way is the best way. So you can just ask something like, how do I tell RStudio where I can find my files? So in every case, I'm just giving you ChatGPT's answer. I just deleted unnecessary stuff. I didn't change anything, and I formatted it. So it tells you, and then I put these pictures in myself. Click on the session menu at the top, choose Set Working Directory, exactly right, and navigate to the folder where your files are going to be. So hopefully everybody was able to download the data and access the data. And the next thing, too many buttons. Uh-oh. This is not working. There we go. So we want to load our first data set. How do you load an Excel file into RStudio? I think that was part of the first query. So I just asked ChatGPT this. I'm convinced that everyone could do this on their own. So click on the file in the menu bar. It's over here. and you need to go to Import Dataset and from Excel. So I'm assuming somebody just handed you an Excel file or a CSV file and you want to get it into RStudio. So if everybody can try to do that, this is the code. It shows you the code you might want to use on your own, so you could save it for later, but this is a lot easier to do it visually. And third, we want to save our data in R's native format for use later. And that's just a good idea, so you don't have to keep reloading things from a source file. So maybe everyone can ChatGPT that. How do you save it in R's native format? Unless you know. I just want to make sure everybody's got the data as we get started, because otherwise nothing else is going to work. So I'll assume everybody is Googling that, or ChatGPT did. And in this case, it generated an R command for me to use. There are other ways you can use save as. But what I'm going, this is an optional step. This is already in our supplemental files. If you really want it, you do not have to save the data because it's already loaded. But it's given me a command. Please save the registration data in R data format for use later. And as I said, that's already on the website. So you have the data in your space, and the question is, what can we do with these data? So again, this is optional, and you can download it from the site if you want it. So this is really annoying. There's a timestamp that looks ridiculous. I don't know what to do with this. It's 2/8/2024, all this crazy information. Can you help me create a new variable that's the number of hours from when the person signed up, and then add that to the data frame? Please do not overwrite timestamp. Can you try to do that? What can we do?
We have to make sure that R knows that that's the date time.
Yes. So you might know how to do that. I didn't. This is kind of a big pain. So maybe you can ask ChatGPT for help with this. What does it tell you to do? Does it generate code? Yes, it does. So if I use this exact query, and on the very first pass, I had no idea how to do this. And in Excel, even, this would be a huge pain. So this is what I did. It said, assuming your frame is called this, it created a new column called timestamp. I would never have figured this out on my own. Well, never might be a long time, but it would be kind of tough. And it created this whole sequence of code that just generated the number of hours since the first person signed up, where the first person is a 0, and everyone goes after that. And again, this was the first time I asked, and it did it perfectly right away. So you can try to do this on your own and generate it. I've uploaded all the data for us to work with regardless. But the point is, this is already a non-trivial thing and would have taken me a long time using other tools, but the LLM did it perfectly right away. We'll eventually do some things with the data, but I wanted to create the database. So I said, I'm attaching my data again. Can you generate code for me to get a histogram of the new variable, hours since first? That's what they tried to call it. And I'm realizing that for us to run the code, you could run it with whatever you called it. Who was successful in recoding the variable? Did it generate code for you and you recoded the variable? Because I didn't put the code online for you to run it. No? Okay, it was, I guess, a little more complicated. It worked for me the very first time, but I want everybody to be able to run along with the analyses. So let me do this. Again, I've never done this before. I didn't know how successful we would be at it. So in our subdirectory, maybe this would be a good a good way to save a bit of time so we all have the same data set. If you go into supplemental code for later, there's something called registration data done.r data, and it actually has all of the transform data for you already, so you don't have to figure out how to do it on your own. So if you can maybe download that and load it so that we can work with the exact data. I'll give everybody a minute to do this. You can ask ChatGPT if you would like. You'll have to save this. In fact, maybe I'll do it. I'll put myself on the spot. So I need to download this data. Upload? Oh, do you have ChatGPT window open? Well, we can do that. A ChatGPT, by the way, is good with many variables, many data types. You can attach anything to it. Poe will not allow you to do that. So let me just do this first. I have to go to Dropbox, and I don't know, where's my quick access thing here? Midas. I'll dump this in here. So I have a different data frame. In fact, let's see how well this works. I don't know how to load data. I'm not sure what to do. What do? I do know how to load data, but let me, it's one thing I do know in R. So let me do what I would do if I had just really no idea how to move forward. I can ask any of the LLMs, and maybe, I'll try Poe, because I'm already in there. How do I open an R data file in R Studio? I'm going to do that in a second. Yeah, I just want to make sure other people can, because we don't need to do that yet. In fact, I never uploaded that file to ChatGPT, the data file. You can do it. In fact, a very nice way to work is to upload a small snippet of your data and say, I'm working with data that looks just like this, and it somehow understands all the structure and variable names. So it, whoops. So it basically tells me how to do this, but why don't I do it in real time with everybody else so that we're all on the same page. So I want to open a file. And once again, it cannot seem to remember what my home directory is, so let me go there. I just downloaded this new data set, and I'm just going to click on it. And it says, do I want to load this into my global environment? And it says, yes. And it's registration data done. I do want to rename it to get rid of the done, but why don't we look at it? You can just double click on things. And this ensures that all of the data that we're going to use is in the format we're eventually going to use it. So we were going to create a lot of these along the way, but I realized that if you make a mistake in what you call it, it won't actually work. So here was the timestamp, and here is the new variable that it created, which is exactly what I want. It's the number of hours since the first person signed up, and we're going to use that as something we want to visualize. So if everybody can do that, that would be super. And I'd like to rename it just so that my code, because it's uploaded, works with this data. So if everybody can just, there's probably a way, this is stupid for me to ask, is there an easy way to rename, or do I have to reassign it? I always forget. Well, this will work. This will also stop me from rewriting it. Registration data v1. Here we go. And if I do this, yeah. So it's just recreated the original file. So now any of the code that I've uploaded will work with that. So I'll wait a moment till everybody can you just put a little back arrow. So the original file was registration data v1, and I just said that I want to change the one with the done in its name to that. And that way we'll all have the same variables to work with. You can all collaborate or communicate on how to do this. I can also, now that I think about it, why don't I be collaborative? We have our little collaborative space. So why don't I do that to the extent that people have it open. So here is our collaborative space. And oh, wow, that's hardly legible. So this would be the command that you would use. But you could have ChatGPT'd it. I just want to make sure everything is named correctly so that we can move forward and share results. So I'll wait just a moment. Oh, please don't write in this file. You can copy it. Yeah, it's fine. Because anything you put here, including personal notes, will be seen by everybody immediately. So you just want to copy this line out once you get the new data file in, and it will give you what we see. So I'll move on to our first little task because you can be doing the other thing in the background. So we've renamed a file, and we have our variables. And again, the point is I didn't know how to do this, and it worked on the first pass. So I would like a histogram. Can you just come up with a picture? You've never done a histogram in R before, we'll assume. We have a new variable called hours since first, and it's in our data frame. Can you figure out, take like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, you can ask any of your large language models, how do I generate a histogram of this new variable that we just created? It's the number of hours since everybody signed up. So let's make that our little communal assignment. And what I can do to make it easier is I will go back, and I have this is strangely small. So this is our communal space. Anybody that wants to, how do I zoom? View. There we go. Whoa. That's kind of extreme. Oop. Yeah, please don't copy into there unless you're sure you want to. We'll make it a little bit of maybe a competition, although that's not the best way to learn anything. If anybody gets a result, they can literally just right-click on their result in RStudio of their histogram, and they can copy it into our communal space. And we'll take a look at it. Don't copy it inside the words. It'll try to overwrite them. Did anyone get a histogram yet? Yay, we have our first, don't overwrite it. We have our first contender. This looks pretty good. In fact, I think whoever did this was actually clever and played with the bins a little bit to make it come out better and didn't use the defaults. So they stole my thunder a little bit. But this is the idea. You want to take a quick look at the data. And this is a particularly good look at the data. And I'm assuming, who did this, by the way? Who copied it? Oh, not you. Oh, yeah. Did you know how to do it already, or you used ChatGPT? You did do it. You changed it. Yes. So that was super clever. So the point is, she didn't. You may have known what to do. I'm just going to assume she didn't know how to do the histogram. Asked for the code, got the code, and she took another step. So let me go back to what I was doing and see what I think a lot of you would see. That was great, thank you. And I'm assuming that everybody can follow the same procedure. And again, all the code is already there. So it generated this code for me, and it gave me this. This is bad. When I look at this, I see a lot of ones and a few more because it uses some heuristic that it has, ChatGPT, to determine what the bin width should be. And I don't think this summarizes the data very well, which she recognized, and she changed it on her own. but why think when you can think about what you want, but I said there's too many bins, so can you do this again, grouping it by week? I won't ask everybody to do this one because this comes out, I think, for everybody very quickly, but I asked ChatGPT, and it's super polite. It says, certainly, if you'd like to visualize the history, this is I miscopied here. With fewer bins. It's not the logarithm. This is going to be the right graph, but I copied the wrong line there. This is very close to what she got, and it decided on a number of bins that would be more reasonable, and now we can see some sense of what's going on in the data, and there are high parts and low parts, and you can just say there's too many bins, there's too few bins, and ChatGPT will recode the variable for you automatically. So I'm assuming many of you got the histogram, and what we'd like to do is say, is there some distribution to this? What's a good way to capture, you can type this in if you'd like to, something like this. What's a good way to capture the underlying density of a histogram? Somebody might say, I think it's bimodal, or I think it's normal, and you have to give them an answer. So why don't you try that if you're in a large language models, because this is just a general question. And see what it tells you. Anybody can raise their hand if they think they have a good answer. And it might be different from what I got. Anything? What do you think is a good way?
It's a kernel density estimate.
A kernel density estimator. Oh my God, what is that? I've never heard of such a thing. It sounds very hard to do. Let's see what my ChatGPT said. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of different ways. And this is actually what I love about using this. I knew about 3 of these, but it gave me 5, and I'd never used a rug plot in my life, and violin plots very rarely. So it's giving me a lot of different ways, but the first one is usually the best. I could go back and say, look, which of these is the most commonly used? I'd want to make an illustration for somebody. It would surely tell me the one she came up with, which is a kernel density estimator. So we can try this, since all of you, or many of you, tried the histogram. Great. Can you put a kernel density estimator on top of your histogram? And you might have gotten a histogram like hers, you might have gotten a histogram just like mine, but why don't you see if you could generate code, assuming that you got the histogram, for a kernel density estimator. And I'll give everybody a minute. That's if you got the histogram. It should be able to put one on top for you. And if you're not running the code in real time, that's just completely fine. I'm going to go to our communal space. There's probably a better way to go back and forth. Let me move down. And there was that question. Can you give me a kernel density estimator to put on top of it? If anyone's successful at this, they can copy. You did? Do you want to copy it into the, we'll see what it looks like, and then we could critique it. Wow. I think that looks better than the one I came up with. This is really good. This is, it picked good colors. It tried to illustrate what's going on. But if I wanted to know what the shape of the data is, what might be your reaction to this? Does it look like it tracks all of the data? What is it not doing a great job at? Yeah, I mean, like, this is pretty good. I mean, it goes up where it's up, and it goes down where it's down, but like, there's something going on here. There's some troughs, and there's this big hump, and this big hump, it's only about half as high. So I might say to myself, maybe the way that it decided to draw this isn't the best way, so let's look at the next one. I need it to be wigglier so that it captures the ups and downs of the data better. Remember, this is you. You're trying to describe the data and generate something you can use to illustrate it. So if you think it should be wigglier, why not ask it? Generate something wigglier. So maybe somebody can give that a try. You can just say, please update the code and give me more wiggly code. And we'll see if it works. So no one's used this data before, so everything we see is novel. Yes, interact,
So,
yes.
I had a bug, and I had to fix it. And the way, whatever the reason why I read the data and it has empty cells in it.
Uh-oh. Wait, you read in my data file? You read in the my data file, the R data?
Yeah. And so probably the reason is because it's reading the bottom rows, it has data, and bottom rows doesn't have anything.
That's odd, because does anybody else have empty cells, or it's giving are you using Windows, RStudio in Windows?
Yeah. No, Mac.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I have to deal with NA issue.
Maybe you can delete those rows?
Yeah.
That's really odd, because it shouldn't have generated those, and it might be something that's intrinsic to the Mac RStudio platform. But I would maybe just either Google GPT how to get rid of it. Yeah. Did it work when you did that?
But the thing is, yes, I mean, but the thing is that usually when it has that, it has a bug like that, and you're supposed to run 3 lines of code. And the idea is that you have to know where the bug is.
No, you don't. I'm glad you brought that up. So every time I run something and it doesn't give me what I want or an error, I copy the error, because that's how large language models work. They kind of smooth out over time. I literally copy the error into the box, and it goes, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I didn't know that would happen. And it almost always can fix it on the first try or the second try. Just as an aside, I often do something I call dueling LLMs. I will take the results from one LLM and an error, and I'll say, like I get it from ChatGPT, I'll go to Poe and say, I don't know what's going on. My code just won't work, and I keep getting this error. And it's like, oh, yeah, you're using a deprecated package, or this is not the right data type, and it fixes it. Going back and forth between them, because they have complementary strengths, almost always will fix an error that you get. This is actually I don't want to try to generate an error now to take time to show it, but you can just literally copy the error into the box, and it will regenerate the code. So did anybody get the less wiggly version? Can someone copy it in so we can see it?
Hey Fred.
Yeah.
This isn't a site while we're waiting. There's a site called Chat Leaderboard Arena, which will pull up 2 LLMs beside each other. And when you run a query, it'll run both, so you can kind of benchmark them against each other if you're not sure.
How do you know which one's better?
Well, it will show you both results, and then you vote on which one you think is better. Like they're collecting data on like what LLMs work better for different contexts. I'll send you the link.
You can just tell me what it is, and I can put it here, because we have that capability, or you can copy it in.
It's chatlmsys.org.
Chat what?
LLMsys.org.
That's cool. I won't go there now, because I'm a little concerned that we'll lose the thread. But new stuff is always becoming available. What I would really love is if somebody would write something that plugs into R or Python, and it tries out all of the LLMs and says, this one looks the best to me. It's like a meta thing. So this is a good first step. Thank you, whoever put this in. This looks a lot wigglier to me. It might not be wiggly enough. It might be too wiggly. And you can say, what parameter do I need to adjust to figure out the wiggliness? Or is there something that uses different wigglinesses for different part of the graph? I do this all the time until it comes up with something that I think speaks to the audience that I'm trying to explain the data to. So if none of you ever did a histogram and tried to fit an empirical distribution over it, it took like 8 minutes. And we got something that I think looks pretty good and explains the data. And if somebody comes along and says, I think these data are normally distributed, they're kind of not, although we'll be testing something like that in just a moment. But the point is visualizing the data and then maybe doing some statistical tests that explain what's going on. So this was great. Someone in the audience managed, maybe not everybody did, but it's really nice that it's possible to do it with data that normally would not be amenable to that. So so this was what I got when I first ran it, and then I did my wigglier version. It gave me this, And I got something like this, and you might say, not wiggly enough, and we can make it wigglier with just a parameter. So whoever uploaded it and I got something that was really quite similar. Let's try another one. So just as a little segue, whenever I talk to people outside academia, they think this is the life of faculty. We spend 40% of our time with great thoughts and teaching and service and grants. And aside from plotting revenge and secret inner life, what did I leave out of this completely? Coding to do what specifically? What do you spend most of your time? No, well, research is great thought. Sorry, I assumed that was research. What do we spend most of our research lives doing? We do a lot of clean data. No, I'm after one specific thing, so I'll just steal my own thunder here. We have to revise. Yes, I think we'll all agree that I used to think you write a paper and you send it to a journal and they're bowled over by its brilliance. That's never happened to me once. Instead, they're like, you're really lucky we're not rejecting it. Here's literally, I just got 18 single-spaced pages of reviews from a journal, and they want me to do the sun, moon, and this is on the second round of a paper, so we have to do it again. They want us to look at our data every different way, because we do empirical research. We don't always run studies with experiments, and we take data from the world, and we have to figure out what's going on. So I would say most of my time as a researcher is actually revising my work based on what reviewers say. So I hope you won't mind. I've pretended that you've started this way and you've submitted a paper, and then 3 reviewers and an AE respond to your work, and they make very clever suggestions about how you can do better. So for the rest of it, reviewer 2, I've taken works from classic literature. This is Voldemort. Reviewer 2 says, this is confusing. Your x-axis needs to be on the log. Why don't you give that a whirl? Like, you want to redo what you just did, say, please regenerate my code, but I really want the x-axis to be log scaled. And it's going to come out like looking really different and interesting. So let me see if I can use my Alt-Tab. Use the power of the medium, as they say. Yes, it worked. So I'll move down. Oops. No. Oh. Did somebody do this already? Did this just get copied in as an answer to the question? This can't be the log. Oh, this is, I see. The scale is logged. Yeah, you can put it. There's 2 ways to do this. You can use a log scale on the x, or you can actually do the log. Oh, how come I'm not seeing what's...
Sorry, I just realized that. If you just click on your window...
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
I'm realizing this now, actually.
It's not doing anything. Yeah. Let me go back. I'll do it the old-fashioned way. Okay, so I know I have to hit escape. That will do it. So much for good theories. Here we go. So yeah, no, I don't want to know about George Lucas's 80th birthday, much as I admire him. The log of weeks since the first regression, they got this, and this is the empirical distribution that goes over it. It looks kind of different, and this is one of the things that we would see is that the regularization, the way that we find commonalities and smoothing, in a log variable might look very different than in the original variable. And I think this is a lot easier. To me, this says there's kind of like a 3-humped, a trimodal distribution, and we really didn't see that in the underlying data. So you might decide, yeah, it makes sense. There are some people that sign up early, and then there's a mad rush towards the end. And that's kind of what this is saying. There's a few early birds. There's a reason for this. I'm pointing this out. There's a few early birds who signed up way in advance, and then there was a hump, and then there was a big hump right before the talk. So you might say that grouping the data this way, we see that there are 3 kinds of people. This isn't a formal model. We would have to run some type of latent class model to figure out if there were really 3 humps or check it against a mixture of normals. But this gives us a different sense of what the data actually look like because we picked a different scale. So we thank reviewer 2. Thank you, reviewer 2. That was wonderful. I thank reviewers for everything, even if I want to scream sometimes. Reviewer 3 comes along. This is Marty Feldman from Young Frankenstein, and says, I'm sure this is different for faculty or not. Can we see both? So we're actually going to try to do a real analysis from here on, and a whole bunch of them. Someone comes along and says, you're making believe everybody is the same. I think that faculty have a different empirical distribution than non-faculty, and just to save some time, this is why I had you load the data. Let's look at our data frame again. If we go in here, we helpfully created a variable called isFaculty, and everybody should have that if they loaded the data. So maybe this might take a little bit longer. That's why I put my actual query in the communal slides. Can you get ChatGPT to show on the same graph the distribution for the faculty and the non-faculty? And I think this is a good idea. Someone says, I don't think these things are the same. And the first step should be, let's look at it. But instead of looking at the complex data with a lot of spikes, let's just look at a nice smooth distribution and see if our eye can pick anything out. So this one's a little trickier. You might want to copy my query in. Remember, it's called isFaculty. It's a binary variable. We're going to be using that a bunch in the future. So it's good to make sure you have it in your data frame. Someone's a ringer here, although they have a small. By the way, I just want to point out that you can, it's an odd fact. Where's a plot here? I don't have any plots. You can move this around, and your plot window suddenly becomes a lot more rectangular shaped. So when you right-click it and copy it, it will come out a little easier. So I will, and there's a lot of ways to, oh, whoever did that, wow, you're crazy fast. You're faster than I would be for sure. Oh, you're making it bigger for everybody. That's very thoughtful. So here's for faculty and here's for all others. And I'm glad it came out this way. This is the variability that you see in ChatGPT. I can eyeball this. Here's the two shapes, but that's hard for me. So whoever did this or anyone else that's gotten it, can you ask them to put it on the same graph so we could compare them to one another? And that should not be super hard to do. Because you can do this, but it's a little bit hard. Like, is this really that much higher than this? Is this that much higher than that? Let's see what it comes up with. Okay, this is really just to show you that you can interact in real time with the data. If you can't do all of this, again, I put all my code there, and somebody will come up with it, I think. I think just the thing to ask for is I always tell it, that's great, this is just what I want, but can you put the two graphs on top of one another on the same axis? And I bet it would do it. Because we want to make reviewer 3 happy. Oh, wow, someone again is super fast and also very thoughtful. This is amazing. Yeah, that's, oh. And they're reorganizing it as well. I won't touch it. So to me, I might say, these do look a little bit different, but there's a hump here and a hump here and humps here, and these are separately regularized from one another. In other words, they're smoothed differently. I think, in my own judgment, that there's not a huge difference between those, but that probably won't make reviewer 3 happy because they're a scholar after all, and they have to make us do everything. So let me go back to my own presentation and look at what I came up with. It was, I tried to make everything fit on one slide. So, mine is not quite as pretty, but there's this long left tail. I didn't do it. I have a logarithmic scale on the bottom. Remember, the other person just changed the scale so that the scale was log, but I changed the variable to be the log. So mine is stretched out a little bit more, but I'm seeing pretty much the same thing. To my eye, these look pretty similar to one another. And reviewer 3 might say, yeah, but looks are deceiving. What I believe is statistical tests. I know p-hacking when I see it. You can Google p-hacking if that term is not familiar. I want you to test that these distributions are different. Can you ask ChatGPT, how can I test whether these two distributions are different? And I think what it will say is that I'm going to, yeah, okay. We didn't look at the results yet. Oh, no, it did. Oh, I want to go back up. No, 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 go back. Yeah. It's telling me that I can use something called the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, but maybe you can carry it out, ask the same question. There's actually a whole bunch of different tests for equality of distributions, but this is the most common one. So see if you can generate the code and generate the answer.
For just clarification, do we have access to these slides?
I'm gonna I have,
Right now, right.
but I put all the code. All the code is in the supplemental code index. If you want to take my code and run my actual code, so you actually do have it.
Where is that?
It's in supplemental code for later. Yeah, that's where all the extra variables were. I thought some people might say, I just want to see what you're seeing and run it on their own machine. So you can do that if you want to, but I didn't want that to be the whole session. Like, run my code and see that you can get it. Let's go to our communal slides again, because it's so fun. Oh, no, that's not it. I have to go back and forth again and again. So let's go down. And oh, somebody already put it in there. This looks very good. I get a D value, whatever. I'm going to make this a little bigger. I hope the person won't mind, because we want to easily see it. We get a D value of 0.24695 and a P value. If you've ever seen that Tom Lehrer skit where he talks like the Russian mathematician Lobachevsky, he goes, this I know from nothing. So my feeling is D equals 0.246. I don't know what the hell that is. What does it mean? I know what a p-value is, but I don't know how to interpret it. So I asked ChatGPT to help me with that interpretation. We have to be careful with that. It can go too far. But you can do this as well. I don't think it's critical that everybody tries to run through this. So look, I got the same Kolmogorov-Smirnov as this person did, because this has a right answer. And I said, ChatGPT, it gives me the following. What does that mean? And it loves stuff like this. I mean, it just gives me a whole crazy explanation. But the important part, which I did highlight, with a p-value of 0.099, assuming a significance of 0.05, because Moses came from Mount Sinai with 0.05 on it, there is not enough evidence to reject that the null hypothesis from two samples come from the same distribution. I cannot reject it. What the reviewer is saying is, I don't believe you. I think they're different distributions. Well, I just tested it, and it's not true. And you may never have heard of how to test two empirical distributions, but it suggested the most common way, generated the code, and when you said, I don't know what it's telling me, it's told you what it means. Is this a good way to do research? Absolutely not. You have to know what you're doing. But it's a good way to actually see what might be sensible, and then you can read up on it. I would not put this in a paper I was trying to publish. I would learn what's going on. But the point is, within under like 5 minutes, you were able to take a hypothesis that somebody made and visualize it. And if you didn't like the visualization, you can say, let me do a test. And if it were in our field, this is Yeshim Orhun is on the faculty with me, we can tell you that we'd have to do 7 other tests to make sure that they all were, you're laughing because she's an AE at a journal where she imposes this on people all the time. No, you don't do that. So this is a great way to start. If I was going to follow up, I would say, are there other tests for equality of distribution? Can you generate that? How do they compare? What are they good at? And I've done this. I just did this on a revision where we literally had to do this. And it gave me all the major tests in code, and then I read up on them. And it did some other things that I'm going to take you through in just a minute. Reviewer 1 has been quiet so far. I have been quiet so far, but it's my turn to give you extra work. First, I think that the categorical variables role and mailing list are dependent, meaning something I'll get you on later on. So if we look at our variables, let us do that, because we love looking at our data first. So I'm going to go back. I have to make this role. So we have a variable called role. It's faculty, grad students, staff, postdoc, all kinds of things. And the other one was mailing list. Whether you're on the mailing list, whether you didn't answer, or whether you are on the mailing list. And this person is saying, I think there's a dependency there, and your analyses are going to be challenged causally by the dependency, but they're categorical variables. What a total pain. maybe we can ask, you can try to do it, can you ask ChatGPT, how can I test whether these variables are dependent on one another? Because we usually can do a regression, but these are categorical. In fact, they might even be count variables, but we'll ignore that for the time being. We'll just treat them as categories. So I'm going to ask, let us go to our communal spreadsheet. So far, we've had 100% success rate, at least with some person. How do I test if they are dependent? You might even call out the answer, what kind of test should you do, but eventually you'll want to check it. What's the test for dependence of two categorical variables? Many of you would know this just because you deal with categorical data. Yeah. Yeah, a chi-squared on a contingency table. But there's a twist. Why don't you try it? First, you should ask ChatGPT what to do, and then how to run it, and then see if you can get the results. Because remember, we have to do what the reviewers suggest. And this is actually an important thing to know how to do. And I'll explain why in a moment. But it's going to be a little twist. Something fun is going to happen. Yeah. Oh, you got it? Oh, wow, that was fast. Pearson's chi-squared test, contingency table, 10 degrees of freedom, number of rows, -1, number of columns, -1. So this looks right to me. And there's a p-value of 0.1022. Let's see if that's what I got. Hopefully it is. You never know. So I ran it, and it asked for a chi-squared test, and I got a slightly different chi. That's interesting. Wait, no, that's the same. 10 degrees of freedom, 0.1022. But what is this, I ask you? It's telling me that the chi-squared approximation may be incorrect. So I could ask, in fact, this is what I would do. Hey, ChatGPT, it's telling me that the results I got from this fancy statistical program might be wrong. Whatever does that mean? But maybe somebody can tell me, those of you that have dealt with data like this, what's the problem with these cell counts? What? I just gave away part of it. It's the cell counts. What's the problem? That was correct, but it was technical. What's the real problem for what don't we want in a contingency table? Yes, you know too much. Yes, you knew the right number. Expected value less than 5. It turns out that the chi-squared test is based on the asymptotic normality in each cell, and that doesn't come close to kicking in until you're at about 5. And whenever I start seeing numbers like 1 and 0, I strongly suspect that I'm not going to have expected cell counts around 5. And what this is telling me is this looks very exact. Like I would go back to the reviewer and say, oh, p-value's high, you're wrong. I don't think these are dependent. But maybe that's not the right answer. So instead of going to a textbook on categorical data analysis, what would I do instead? I would say, hey, ChatGPT, help me out with this. I got the following results. Why the error message? I'll just save a bit of time, and it gives me a crazy answer, like, oh, it might be incorrect. It tells me what the whole problem is, and it suggests something called Fisher's exact test, and you can read about that, but what Fisher's exact test is, it's combinatorial. It actually computes the sampling distribution, and it's computationally insane once you have too many things inside a table. But once there's a lot of things in a table, asymptotic normality kicks in, and the chi-squared is valid. So it actually is pretty practical, and it generated this code for me, and it did the exact test. No normality assumptions kick in. And in fact, it's even better for me. Fisher's exact test is 0.1459. The reviewer who says there's terrible threats to validity because these things are correlated, I can come back and say, no. So as a little joke, I said, hey, based on the results of the Fisher's exact test, can you tell me what to say to the reviewer? That's on the top. And ChatGPT wrote me this, again, I would edit it, wrote me this incredibly polite and well-spoken answer, even starting, dear reviewer, given this p-value, we failed to reject the null hypothesis between the role and mailingless variables. This suggests that there's no significant association between values in our data set. Again, someone says something about your data, you visualize it, you try different tests, you can even figure out how to reply. Again, you have to know what you're doing. You can't just copy something and say, hey, reviewer, ChatGPT answers you this way. But it's likely to be right for well-trod areas of statistics like contingency tables that people have been doing for like 80 years. And it can use the most up-to-date packages to do that type of analysis. So if you don't know how to answer somebody, you could say, what are the 2 or 3 most common ways? Can you generate code? How do you know it's right? You can do dueling LLMs. I usually don't say, hey, Po, ChatGPT gave me this. Are you the smarter LLM? I'll often say, I did this on my own. I'm not sure about it. And it will give me an updated thing. I run the code from all of them, or I can use this tool that you told me about, where I can vote on which LLMs are better. So this is pretty much a clear answer to the reviewer that I do not have this confound in my data. Reviewer 2 comes back and says, my seminal paper from 1977 suggests a roughly constant time between signups, so the times in your data set will be linear. But reviewer 1 says, my even more seminal work from 1978 says it's quadratic. The AE, always trying to mediate, I use that word very deliberately because we'll get there in a moment, says we have a difference of opinion. Can you figure out if this is nonlinear and how? So I asked, I have hours since first, and I want to see if it's increasing linearly with the variable line. That's the order in which people signed up, and then there's the time that they signed up. So if there's a constant space between them, they should be kind of a linear relationship. Reviewer 1 and 2 have each written seminal articles, one saying that it's linear, and the other saying it's quadratic. So maybe you can ask your ChatGPTs to run those analyses, and importantly, how do I test which one is correct? And if you want, you can use my query, or you can come up with one of your own. And this one works, I think, super well. It has a very clear and correct answer. So I'll give you all a minute to give that one a try. And we're going to do better than both of these in just a minute. But it's a great thing to know how to do. Yes? Interject.
We may be getting to this later, but I feel like you're giving us things to say, and it's working. But are you going to at some point talk about how you phrase why are they working? How are you phrasing the,
to be honest, I just ask for what I want. I didn't pick this phrasing. I don't have any magical phrasing capabilities.
Oh, really?
No, I mean, I've done it a bunch. Just to back up, because I think this is a great question. The biggest mistake I see people, especially PhD students, making when they use LLMs is they say, here is my high-level goal. Can you help me get here? It's like, I want to climb Mount Everest, but I'm a couch potato. The LLM can't figure out how to do that for you. LLMs are awesome at being led in very small steps, and I should have mentioned that. That's why I started with a linear and a quadratic model. These are the easiest things you can do with the data. I would always start with something easy that you completely understand and can visualize, so you can do a sniff test. This looks wrong. And then when you're pretty sure that those answers are right, you can go to the next step. So that was a great question, Elizabeth. But with querying, I mean, these are literally the words I put in. How can I figure out if they're increasing linearly? I don't think anybody can do this, a lot better or a lot worse than I can. It's just what I'd like to know. But there is an art, and you want to lead the LLM in small steps. And I encourage it. I know this sounds silly. I'll say, that's great. That's exactly what I wanted. But I need one thing a little bit different, and then I'll do that after. So good question. But this one should be pretty simple because it just has to run a linear model to relate to variables, or a quadratic model. So while you're trying that, I know we have some people here who are very fast. Let me go to our communal sheet. And again, I'll put all these slides, everything there. Maybe they'd be, oops, that's not it. That's our contingency table. And, oh, that was fast. Oh, great. Yep, this is exactly what I did, and I have space for these things. Oh, it's telling me who's there. Can somebody tell me what results they got? Are these significant or non-significant? Or you could copy them on the next page, but that's a bit of a pain. Did anybody get an answer to this? Who's right, the linear reviewer or the quadratic reviewer? Oh, someone's even copying the results in the next. Oh, excellent. Or maybe not. But it generated the code perfectly. This is almost exactly what I got. And this is something that I would expect everyone to be able to ask ChatGPT to do. So if we don't have an answer yet, since that code will undoubtedly produce the right answer, I just want to compare them, and it gives me these results, and it gives me the, I actually asked it to explain things a little bit for me, and I put it in. And since the code was correct, I got all of this. Here's the call, here's everything I get from the linear model, here's everything I get from the quadratic model, and boy, does that look significant to me. That, however, this is getting a little technical, this significance is based on only running one model, and it assumes something very technical about the Hessian of this model at the optimum. A better way to do it is to take both models and run a slightly different statistical test, an F-test, to compare them. It really doesn't make much difference, and I didn't even ask ChatGPT to do this. It knew. It said, I think this is the right test for you, and that's what the person also came up with, and it shows me extreme significance. So it looks like there is a quadratic relationship in this data. One of the reviewers' contentions is very much borne out. So, but now here's where things get interesting. The AE says, I need to see the results, and I said non-linear, not quadratic. And as somebody who also was a journal editor, I get a little upset when somebody said, okay, you thought it was nonlinear, I put in a quadratic term. There's a whole world of nonlinearity that's not quadratic. So before we go on, can somebody maybe ask ChatGPT, maybe you don't even have to put in my query, but you can just ask it, how can I tell if a regression model has nonlinearities? Is there a better way than putting in a quadratic term? I put in my queries to make it a little easier, but it might be more fun if you try it yourself. How can I answer the reviewer? What's a good model to run? What does ChatGPT tell you, or Poe? What technique should we use? You don't have to do the analysis. What's the name of the analysis? What should we run? What? Oh, it's slow. Okay. Okay, we have about 45 minutes left, and I've prepared a crazy amount of stuff, so I might go a little bit faster. With the understanding that, again, I did not write any of this code, and I think you can do this just as well as I did. It says, first of all, let's visualize. That's the first thing we want to do. And it's actually put the linear and quadratic. I ran the code. It told me this was the first thing it did. It ran it, and it said, here's the linear and the quadratic. And I think what it's saying to me, looking at this visually, is, look, the quadratic may be significant, but there's almost no difference. And then if you look at the two things together, it's just because the error bands are so tight, you can statistically distinguish them from one another. But unfortunately, neither one of them looks exactly like the data. Like, some of the data is below both curves here systematically, so I don't think it's a good model. A good model, the residuals are supposed to look like garbage. Those don't look like garbage to me. They're all below both curves here. So I think the AE is right. Just because I said nonlinear and you say it's quadratic, I don't think that's correct. So I asked ChatGPT, is there a more general type of regression to see if it's nonlinear? And this was its answer. Yes, there's something called the generalized additive models package. And just as an aside, if there's any single technique I'd like to add to everyone's arsenal in all of statistics, it's this. It's been around for 25 years, since a seminal paper by Hastie and Tibshirani, and they're extremely well understood. And there's this genius package called MGCV. It's right over there. Someone who's dedicated his life for 25 years, Simon Wood, to maintaining it and writing a truly phenomenal textbook. And instead of doing regression, it just says, what's the best way, without getting too wiggly, it does it automatically, to try to fit relationships in the data. I did not ask ChatGPT to run a generalized additive model for me. I just said, what's a good way? And it automatically came up with this. And it generated this code. Like, it's very, very simple. And the remarkable thing about it is you only have to add one little thing. Any model that you want to run, you just put a little s in front of it. You could think of it as a squiggle or a spline is the correct term. And it will automatically take care of your nonlinearity for you without you saying, oh, I think it's quadratic, I think it's this. So in the interest of time, because I just want to show you how much more you can do with this, I said, great, can you do a prediction and put the black dots in? And it turns out that generating the predictions is a little bit complicated, but it knew exactly how to do it. This was the first code that it gave me. And I would say that this looks like it's doing a better job to me of tracking the data. I can control it. I can make it more wiggly than it does. But this, to them, is the best trade-off between complexity and accuracy. And I would feel very comfortable going back to a reviewer or anyone saying, is this good enough for you? I don't think the quadratic or linear fits very well, but this is tracking the data. And if it's not, I'll just change the wiggliness parameter, which ChatGPT can do for you, and it would give you all of this and calculate it. And I do see some places where it systematically deviates. I want to make it a little bit wigglier, but the point is you can take care of this criticism, which is a ubiquitous one in statistics. Nonlinearity is everywhere, yet people insist on putting hyperplanes like linear models through. Or, and there's a point to this, going to the other end and saying, I'm going to get a support vector machine from machine learning because that's a general classifier, and that's a black box, and it's hard to know what it's doing. But this is a statistical model, and I can look at all the parameters of it. I can figure out if its assumptions are met. And it's not just this black box classifier. So I prefer to use this. And literally, I'm being honest with you, all I did is ask this question, and it generated all of this instantly. Again, you have to understand what you're doing, but this takes you a very long way. So reviewer 1 says, you have my seminal theory all wrong. I think that when you're registered can predict whether you're faculty. This person thinks that maybe faculty register for this seminar earlier than other people. How can you test this? Oops, well, whether you're faculty is not on a nice smooth scale. It's a yes or a no. So I can't use the kind of regression that we ordinarily know about. I need to use something else. And you might go, I don't know how to deal with that. Can I use all this fancy stuff with it? So I asked them, okay, look, I want to predict whether someone is faculty based on the hours, how long since the first person signed up. Can you run a simple regression and plot the results with error contours? And this is the important part. You'll have to make a binary dependent variable that's 1 when the role is faculty and 0 otherwise. I already created this for you. I just gave it one question and said, do all of this. Create the new dependent variable, figure out how to do a regression when you have a binary dependent variable, and basically replicate everything that you did and visualize it. And this is the first thing that came out. I didn't tweak it. And it decided that I should use something called logistic regression. And ooh, it's much, much wider. And that's because my dependent variable is 0s and 1s. There's just not as much information. So I get a pretty wide range there. And you might say, well, is this significant? Is it not significant? We don't see the output yet, but I can ask ChatGPT to look at the results and interpret the significance. But it sure looks to me like there is some kind of a downward trend here. This is whether or not you're faculty. So it looks like there's a downward trend in the 0s. What could that possibly mean? I don't understand this. Actually, all I do is discrete choice models. It's my main research area. So I actually do understand it, but it's still kind of hard to interpret. Yeah, so what does this mean? There's all the results. Notice the p-value is actually 0.0616. So even though there was a clear downward trend, it's not significant at the 0.05 level, but I might not trust myself to interpret it. So I was like, yeah, but what does that mean? Can you put it in terms of an elasticity? If you're an economist or people who are fond of scale-free measures, this is a great way to try to understand results when you have discrete data. Or I can ask them, ChatGPT, if there's a good way to do it. And it did all of this for me. It explained what it is, and it generated new code. And I asked it, what about this generalized additive models thing? I don't want to assume that anything is linear. Can you do that with a binary variable? And it's like, of course. So I said, great, can you just do that for me and graph the results? And it did. And it's basically saying, I see no evidence of nonlinearity at all. That makes sense because there were such huge error bands before. If you want to say, I think this relationship is highly nonlinear, it's telling you, it might be, but you just don't have enough data to detect it. So I'm sorry, this is like the best that I can do, and my p-value is still the same. I won't get into this, but it's basically telling you you don't have any nonlinearity at all. It's a first-order relationship. So anybody that comes along and says, I think you have a really complex relationship here, even though it's a 0-1 variable, it could generate all the code for you. It can graph everything. It could interpret it. If I were to ask, what is this telling me? It would say, it's not really telling you much of anything. So, so the AE comes along and says, I just want to make sure that I can get to all the stuff that I've prepared. So you can run all this on your own. But the AE says, I think you have a confound. Faculty may have email addresses that start earlier in the alphabet, and maybe that's why they appear to be signing up earlier. Can you do a mediation analysis? This is an insane hypothesis, but sometimes people believe that stuff like this happens. You might have read Malcolm Gladwell's book that showed that kids who were born earlier in the school year have much more athletic success. So that's what we would call like a mediator variable. It's explaining something and you have to put it in the analysis. The simplest way to think of a mediator is you might say, you keep pushing me. And I might say, what's your evidence? And you might say, every time I see you go like this, shortly afterwards, I feel myself getting shoved. And I might say, that's not true. I'm shoving this person, and then they're shoving you. It has nothing to do with me. There's a mediator there, and that mediator is the one that's doing the shoving. So don't blame me. And so we want to understand causal, like what goes on in the world. So mediation analysis is an exceptionally simple way, a very simple causal model. Yeshim is here. She teaches a whole class on causal inference. I don't know what your opinion is on mediation, but I suspect there's much. Oh, it's okay? It's a good first step? Good. In the behavioral world, everyone has to check mediation, because what it's saying is, I don't think the mechanism that you're telling me about how the world works, I don't think it's right. I think this affects this, and this is affecting this. This does not have a direct path to the other thing at all. And I might go, what is this person talking about? I don't know what mediation is at all. Please help me. Please help me. Oh, what is it doing? It has some weirdo thing going on. So ChatGPT, I just put in what this person said, and it gives me this crazy thing about what mediation is and how you set it up. I could ask it to summarize it further. So this is teaching me about mediation analysis. It's extraordinarily common, and my experience is because of that, what it will tell you is spot on, because it's trained on thousands of documents that explain mediation analysis. And I did read this. It is really exactly correct. But I want to know how to do it. And again, you can try this. Great, I have a variable in my data frame, email3, that is the first 3 letters of everyone's email. Can you convert that into the order in the data set and write the full code for the mediation analysis? So I want to say, are you early in the alphabet or later in the alphabet? So the first thing it needs to do is it needs to come up with where your first 3 letters of your email are. Maybe that's explaining all the results that I see. It has nothing to do with whether you're faculty. Maybe they give faculty better email addresses earlier in the alphabet. And it has nothing to do with being faculty. It has to do with your email. So I ask it to do this conversion for me. And again, all the code is online. And you have it. It's this is faculty variable and the email variable are already in there. It wrote the code for me. I will admit it didn't understand me the first time. It just created something that was clearly wrong, which is good. I had to look at it. So after a while, I got frustrated, and I did my little dueling LLMs trick. I took the result, and I put it into Poe, and I said, this code is not doing what I want. It corrected it instantly. So I got all of this code, and it said, oh, there's a mediation package that everybody uses. And it set up all of the important regression models for me and took the results, and it ran the mediation automatically. And it gave me this thing. And again, to quote Tom Lehrer, this I know from nothing. I'm not a behavioral person. What is going on here? There's a bunch of p-values. They don't look very impressive. And what is this? Simulations? What is it talking about? Well, it turns out that to do a mediation analysis, the key test is a product of two regression coefficients. And that doesn't have a standard distribution. So it uses something called bootstrapping to get the exact distribution of that. And you don't have to do anything because someone has written a program for behavioral researchers. All you have to do is explain what you think the mediation analysis is. And it gives this to you. And it explains everything to me. Here's everything that I got. The results suggest that while there's a significant direct effect of the treatment on the outcome, the mediation of the mediation effect of the mediator is not significant. The mediator does not play a substantial role. I would want to, someone is calling me and they need to go away later. It does not play a substantial role. So I would go back to the reviewer and say, this was a great idea. I understand mediation is very important. I ran this mediation, and I ran a whole bunch of other ones. And no matter what I do, I don't get the mediation to come out. I, in a recent paper, did a non-parametric mediation with that generalized additive model. And I figured out how to set it all up myself. I used LLMs to help me generate the code. And I was able to say, these things that you think are causing my results, they're not. And I didn't make any assumptions about linearity or anything. I really ruled out this class of explanations. You may not even know what mediation is. I just put in what the AE asked for. And again, within 5 minutes, I had all of this. You should go back again, always, that's the caveat, and read so you know what it is that you're looking at. But I want to get to the really fancy stuff that I did. They will always ask you at journals, and I think this is reasonable, can you have an online appendix that explains everything that you did? So I said, can you take my code base, every single line of it? I just copied it into the box, but in ChatGPT, you can upload a huge R program if you want to, and write a document for me in LaTeX that explains the code base, breaking it into sections, making sure it's all there, and set off an ASCII type. It should have sections and headers and detailed descriptions and blah, 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 blah. I want to put it in overleaf. It worked the first time I put everything in. I said, here is the code base. This is the data. This is the data that I put in. It generated this. And I copied it into overleaf, and it gave me this. I didn't edit it at all. It's not perfect. There's little mistakes in the typography, but it said, this is what you do in each step, how you process the data, how you calculate the variables. There's some data visualization, and it did exactly what I wanted. It set off all the code in ASCII using color conventions that make it easy for me to understand the structure of the code. And frankly, I trust this a little more than me doing it. It doesn't miss anything, and you might look back and go, wait, that's not what I thought this code did. It's probably right, and your code is probably wrong. It's trying to interpret what you actually did. So this was very fast. I can show it to you in overleaf. I have that set up. And I thought I was done, but reviewer 3 comes back and says, I've been quiet for a while, but I'm curious about people who signed up for the mailing list, and I'll have some questions about that and for the faculty too. So I said, uh-oh, they want more analysis. Can you set up a new variable for me? That's 1 when you want to be on the mailing list and 0 when you don't. You already have that. So this is very easy. There's no reason for you to go through this. And it tries to look at both these variables, and it says 35 people are faculty, and 32 said they want to be on a mailing list. How suspicious. Maybe there's some relationship between these things. So reviewer 3 says, first, you claim that more than 2/3 of the people attending would be non-faculty. You're a liar. I was like, well, I don't know about that. How can we test whether the proportion of faculty is significantly less than 1/3? This is trivial. We all do this in our intro stats class, but why not ask ChatGPT to do it? And it does. It tests whether or not it's 1/3. Here's my p-value. Here's a confidence interval using bootstrapping. Notice it doesn't go below 0. It does it the right way. And it says, sorry, it's not significantly less than 1/3. So this hypothesis that I had about who would attend is not contradicted by the data. It's not more than 1/3, but it's not significantly less. Wait, here comes the fun part. This is why I'm doing this all myself, because this is stuff that you would not necessarily know how to do or think to do. I don't believe in null hypothesis testing, NHT, and that is becoming the norm in science. Null hypothesis testing and summarizing all of your evidence in a p-value is kind of going away in favor of principled exploration of the data. I uploaded a little rejoinder that I wrote on this topic. It's in our supplemental, but there's a much longer paper that it references that tries to go through all of the problems with summarizing evidence as p-values. So that's in our supplemental file as well. And you're going to see more people like this. Don't give me a p-value. I don't think that's telling me what I want to know. So I want to know the exact sampling distribution. I'm like, what? The exact sampling distribution of a proportion, that's been known like since the Bernoullis. Like, why are you bothering me with this? But they're not. They're bothering ChatGPT. So I say, how can I simulate the sampling distribution of the true proportion of is on the faculty? And its answer is, we can do this with bootstrapping. There's a bootstrapping package. And I can set the whole thing up for you. Just tell me which variable you want. And here we go. Here's the reviewer's hypothesis. I asked it to put in a red line. And here's the sampling distribution. I don't know. I see a lot of that sampling distribution going above your hypothesis. I don't think your hypothesis is necessarily reasonable. They're saying that not a lot of faculty came. It's significantly less than 1/3. I'm seeing a bunch of it that goes above the hypothesis. So I'm sorry, I can't reject it. That's what we found before using the asymptotic distribution of this. That's the standard test that you learn in intro statistics, and it assumes there's a large sample. But what if there's not? This isn't a lot of people. So we can simulate it, and we get a p-value, and it's pretty much the same as what we got before. It doesn't change very much. So I would think that you'd be done with this person, but no, and here it comes. But I'm a Bayesian. You may not know what Bayesians are. We're like a secret society, not that secret. We're getting more vocal. I'm a Bayesian. All I do is Bayesian. Not all. I still like classical statistics. But Bayesians have a bad reputation. You can put in ChatGPT, why do Bayesians have a bad reputation? It will actually tell you. And the reason, somebody wrote a great blog post. It might have been Andrew Gelman, who's a very famous Bayesian statistician. He goes, I'll tell you why people don't like us. We are the school marms of statistics. Whenever there's a fantastic new machine learning technique, we go, well, that's very nice, but let us tell you how to do it exactly right. So we're always like pointing out that everything that happens in statistics is assuming some type of asymptotic normality or regularity or something else. And we're like, we want the exact distribution of everything we don't see. And all of Bayesian statistics is trying to calculate that exact distribution. And I will just come out and say, it's better. It's the right thing to do. It's just insanely computationally intensive. And it used to be that if a doctoral student said, I want to run a Bayesian model, they would be lucky if they got those results in a month. And it's not a month of computer time. It's generating all of these things called conditional densities and programming them and figuring out how to block variables. It's an absolute nightmare. And then a few years ago, I'll show you this. It's on my computer. Can you read what this says? Is it upside down? It says STAN. Oh, STAN. There's a program called STAN that takes Bayesian analysis from something that is an utter nightmare to something that someone can do in an afternoon. And I'm not making this up. I got called a few years ago. There was an undergraduate from China, and she said, I'm really interested in Bayesian stuff. Would you mind if I just sat in on like lab meetings? And I was like, yeah, sure. And then a friend called me, who I met through Elizabeth, and he's like, I'm a doctor, and we have to do this hierarchical model. And we're estimating the proportion of people who suffer from rhinitis. It's a nose condition. A lot of the distribution is going below 0, and proportions can't be less than 0. all the standard software assumed that everything was on an unbounded scale, so all your distributions go everywhere. And I'm like, we don't have to assume that. We can have a different model for what those proportions are. All we have to do is stan, and he was like, will you do this for me? Because I don't want to have to learn this. So I thought this was a great project for this undergraduate, and I didn't know how long it would take her, but the next afternoon she had the whole thing done. He sent me the data. I did give her some directions, and so did a former PhD student. And this guy was so nice. He made both of them co-authors on the paper because they did the main analysis. If it was 10 years ago, I would have told him, you do not want to do a Bayesian analysis for this problem. It's going to take us a month. But someone who was 20 years old that had never touched it before in a language that she did not even master got it done within 24 hours. And I tell this story to illustrate that you can write new models and estimate them and do everything with them using certain tools. And I want to show it to you right now. So reviewer 3 says, I'm a Bayesian. Your frequentist test and simulation offend my rarefied sensibilities. Can you do, but you can do this easily in RStan. Try to use a non-informative prior. A prior is what we assume about the parameters before we get any data. Non-informative is like, don't make strong assumptions. Just don't assume crazy stuff. And I was like, oh my God, can you write a sample RStan program to estimate and plot everything that we just did before? This is the exact query that I gave it, and it remembered everything that I had done. And it said, yes, I can do that. I can do all of these steps for you in Stan. And it generated all of this code. The only thing I did is I highlighted, I just asked it after it did everything, can you just put in a line for me at that 1/3 number where the reviewer said, I don't think that you're right. So that's the only thing I added, and oops. And boom, okay, Mr. Bayesian, it ran on the very first try. This was the posterior distribution. This is the person's hypothesis. And once again, it is not supported by the data. But this is more exact than anything else. And I don't want to spend all day on this. I have to go up. I can play with any assumption inside the model. There's a whole bunch of things in here called priors. I won't spend a bunch of time on it, but I can make them anything I want. It used to be years ago, I had to carefully pick my priors. They had to be something called conjugate. Not anymore. You can change anything in here to anything, and it will figure out all of the crazy details for you and graph what you want, which is kind of remarkable. I said, hey, ChatGPT, you just wrote some Bayesian code for me. I don't know what the hell you did. Can you provide some LaTeX output that explains the code? And it's so happy to oblige me with that. It says, sure, I can. And I just took that code and I dumped it into Overleaf, and it wrote out the exact model and all of the Bayesian details and gave me the posterior distribution. I just gave 2 queries. I said, can you just do what you did in Stan? I ran the Stan code, and then I asked it to document everything for me, and it wrote a beautiful Overleaf document. And again, there are some little mistakes. It's like, not perfect typographically, but it's pretty darn good. It saves a whole bunch of time. But the reviewers are never done. They have not extracted their pound of flesh yet. So he's like, I'm not impressed, which might be the most common reaction to reviewers that I see. Your own write-up shows that the posterior, I want to highlight this, has a known form. What is it talking about? What is this known form? Uh-oh. Yes, it turns out that I can write the posterior exactly. I didn't even know what that is. I didn't know that was a thing. So they're very careful. But a seminal paper written coincidentally by me suggests that the proportion of faculty over the square root of those wishing to be on the mailing list is roughly 3/4. What can you say about that? I picked this for a reason. This is something that has never been investigated, and there's no standard statistical test. And many people in medicine, in imaging, if you want to get the distribution of LDL minus HDL, anything that is not a standard asymptotic normal chi-squared or F distribution, you're kind of out of luck, but you don't have to be. So I literally just put this in. Below is some Bayesian code you wrote. I need analysis just like this for the posterior of is faculty over the square root of is Yepers is on the mailing list. And comparing it to 3/4, which would have a red vertical line, can you write that code for me, please? I didn't think this would work, but it did. And this is the point of Elizabeth's question. I gave it the code I already wrote and said, this is awesome. Now I want you to add something to it. And it did it. And boom. OK, Mr. and Mrs. Bayesian, or Ms. Bayesian, this was for a quantity that does not have a standard asymptotic distribution, but it still came out really well. And it looks like your seminal paper isn't supported for our data. The seminal paper says it should be 3/4, but here's the posterior distribution according to our data. I could compute something like a p-value, how much stuff is in this tail. I can just ask ChatGPT to do it. So the point, again, is this allows you to answer questions about quantities that there is absolutely nothing standard for. Running all of this, took very little time. The hardest part was Stan. It had to compile the code, but I had my answer in under 3 minutes for all of this. So anybody can do this if they're willing to give it a try. Reviewer 3 says, I still don't believe you. I don't think that your chains converged, which is something you always have to check. And I'm like, oh no, how can I tell if the chains converged? Are there any diagnostics? Oh yes, there's a whole bunch of diagnostics. Here's the main ones. I was like, can you show them to me? And here they are. These are something called trace plots. They look gorgeous. Here are the posterior distributions of the two underlying things. Here's something called R hat. We want it to be less than 1.05, which it said on the previous page. It all is. In other words, everything looks great. So the reviewer that says, I don't think you have convergence, sorry, also not right. And all I had to do was put in a simple one-sentence query and ask it to generate the code, and it did all of that for me. How long did all this take? Can you guess? Running all the code and the graphics. How long?
2 hours.
Oh, no one's ever stolen my thunder that badly. Yes. I was hoping people would go, I don't know, 3 days. Oh, no. OK, yeah, I guess it's not that shocking. That making these slides took a lot more than 2 hours, because I had to format everything and make them a little secretive. But running all the analyses you saw, including taking the data from Excel and getting it into R. So if I can do all of this, I knew what I was doing, but I didn't write the code. It should embolden people that when they want to examine their data in ways they never have, they can ask the LLM to help them. Can you think of another way? Is there a package for this? I already did this analysis. Here's the code I wrote. Can you convert it to the new analysis? Can you visualize them both for me? Oh, can you put standard errors around everything? It can do all of this, and it would have taken you forever, at least me forever, to figure out how to do it on my own. So I'd like to summarize just a teeny bit and show you one tiny use case. There's some things that you should not be getting from today. That you don't need to understand statistics to do statistics. I'm always worried about this. Like, yay, I don't actually have to know what I'm doing. I can just let ChatGPT. That's a terrible idea. You could explore the data, but you do have to follow up and make sure that things are rigorous. But the exploration, I don't think, is something you would do because it's so effortful. Just keep trying stuff until it looks good. There is a crisis in academia now because people keep trying things until they come up with something that supports the conclusions that they're after. LLMs make this a lot easier, and I really try hard not to do this. Like, ooh, this analysis is bad. Let's come up with a different model. Let's look at the data a different way. Oh, now the analysis is good because it conforms to what I want to find. You have to be really on guard to make sure that you don't do this with your data. Just keep trying stuff, in other words, until you get the results you're after is also a no-no. Upload anything you want and deal with it later. There is an ethical guideline that you're not supposed to take copyrighted materials, and certainly not anything that is not anonymized and upload it to an LLM. So you have to be kind of careful what you put into it. Code magically works the first time. I would say 80 to 85% of the code that I showed you worked the very first time I generated, but a couple of times, like he asked over there, I got an error message and I put the error message in, and then it always worked on the second try, except for that one I told you where I had to ask Poe, I don't know what's wrong with my code, and then it solved it for me. So I maybe made it look a little easier than it is, but it's 85% first try. No need to report your workflow. I think the beauty of this is I can put every command that I ran I can copy it into ChatGPT and say, explain every single command I ran, every error message that I got. And if you want, generate a LaTeX document that explains my entire workflow for me. I could take the code that I put online for you that contains all of this and say, make an R markdown file for me so I can run it in sections and distribute it. Give me a GitHub repo that is based on all of this. You can do all of that. The important takeaways are LLMs allow you to explore your data efficiently. There's things that you probably didn't do because it's just a big pain. Do I have to download a new package and figure all this out? No. They also let you visualize the specific quantities that allow your results to speak to specific audiences. Like the first few things we did were just show me what the data look like, put a curve over it that captures where it goes up and down. And you might not have known how to do that, but it's really easy to ask for. It dramatically reduces the learning curve for new packages. I find the documentation for R packages something that just makes me want to hit myself with a hammer over and again. And I used to read the vignettes and try. I don't do that anymore. Now I just ask, can you just try to run it for me? And if it looks promising, then I go back and I try to figure out the package. It allows you to document your workflow, annotate code, generate synthetic data. I didn't do that today, but I can take all my code and say, I need to create a replication package. Can you generate data that looks just like mine, that gives me results that are a lot like the ones that I got? And for the most part, it can do this for you in a principled way. It allows you to alter code from others, even stack exchange. You can get code from other people and say, I need to make this work with my data, and it can often do it. And since I have just a few minutes left, I'd like to show you an astonishing example of this that I had on my own. There was a doctoral seminar paper that I was covering, and there was something wrong with the results. I just didn't know what it was. It's a fantastic paper about whether coin flips are really random. Percy Diaconis, this genius at Stanford in the stats department, came up with a physical model that suggested that you should not get 50-50 on certain coins. And these people tested it. They recruited hundreds of people to do coin flips and record them from all over the world. And then they made all their data and code available. It was amazing. So it was publicly available. I downloaded all their data and their code. The code is over 1,000 lines. I'm from Brooklyn, actually, and I could say this word, forget about it, exactly right, but I won't torment you with it. So I said, hey, ChatGPT, what's wrong with this code? I didn't think this would work. So ChatGPT said, I don't know, you're the professor, you tell me. I was like, okay, no, I submit to our robot overlords, please. And this is where if you've seen those movies where the whole room backs up away from you because you're so shocked at what you see, I just asked it to find an error in the code, and this is what it said. Okay, this seems like a 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 design, but conditions 14 and 15 have the same setup. You'll find the error on line 173 of the code. Would you like me to correct this for you? I just didn't know this was possible. It understood, there was annotations in there, but it understood the exact structure of their whole paper from the code, found where the error was, and I said, sure, correct it for me, and it did. And I didn't really believe that their very complicated Bayesian analysis was right. So I said, can you just figure out how to bootstrap these things instead, which is not Bayesian? And it gave me some answers. I compared all of the results to what they got. And then I was like, I think their model is too complicated. I would like to run a simpler model that takes out a lot of the crazy stuff. And it generated all the code for me to work automatically with their data. I compared all the stuff that they got to what I got from the model. And I found out that every one of their conclusions was supported. Not quite as strongly as they said, but nothing in the paper was actually wrong. It was just a small coding error that did not affect anything substantively. This took, I don't know, half an hour, and I didn't write a line of the code myself. So nowadays, with open science, with people putting everything on archive and making all their data available, you can explore that. You can take their code and you can change it. You can write your own. You can create your own visualizations like I did. And it's all pretty easy to do. So last slide, moral of the story. If you have some idea what you're doing, you will do things you would not have done. It's a tremendous time saver, an error catcher. The last thing I do before I ever send code anywhere to a journal is I run it through every LLM and say, do you see any mistakes anywhere? It might not find them, but every time there's been an obvious one, even a spelling error, it's found it for me. And that's it. Thanks for listening. ChatGPT helped with that as well. I'm happy to stay after if there are any other questions. Otherwise, feel free to write if you have any questions afterwards. That's it. Thanks.